So here we are, genius number 10, the final one in our pantheon of the great minds. We move back now to America for the only genius on the list who is still actually alive. A sportsman, indeed, an athlete. Now, Tony, can an athlete really display the same intellectual qualities as a Newton or an Einstein?
Well, follow me through, and this is a story, Ray, that you've never heard either. And you decide at the end of the story whether indeed this person is one of the world's great geniuses. I think you will decide he is, and that he did display virtually all of those multiple intelligences we talked about earlier. His name, as you may have begun to guess, was originally Cassius Clay. Now, Cassius Clay, the boxer, was a little light heavyweight fellow who went to the Olympics, and he won the Olympic crown. And already people were beginning to notice this extraordinary personality bursting out of this light heavyweight boxer. He seemed to be unbelievably energetic. He was especially radiant. He was always talking. He was unbelievably positive. He was witty. He seemed to captivate people's imaginations. And so everybody followed him along when he entered the professional ranks. Now, at this time, they were simply thinking of him as a good, original boxer with a very interesting character. But as we go through his life, you will see some extraordinary things beginning to develop. He started his campaign to become heavyweight champion by proclaiming that he was the greatest. So he simply said, "I am the greatest," and then looked into the camera and almost mesmerized people into believing that indeed he was. And he started this phenomenal campaign in which he would go up to his opponents and he'd look them straight in the eye and he said, "Archie Moore, you're going in 4." And they would all try not to go in the rounds that he'd said they would go. And 17 out of 19 predictions were dead on. And lots of investigation has proved that these were not fixed fights. I mean, these were fighters who just thought they were fighting some young kid off the block. And they were on their way to the various championships that they were pursuing. So he got better and better and more known. And his big goal was obviously the heavyweight championship and to be the youngest that had won it for many, many years. And the block in his way was Sonny Liston. And this is where it becomes not just a physical battle, not just athletics, but this becomes a war of the minds. And it is one of the most extraordinary wars ever fought. And there is still masses of misconception because of the brilliant game, the analytical, the logical, the psychological game that Cassius Clay played. What he started to say was, he said, "I'm pretty and he's a bum. And I'm going to whoop his ass. And he may be big and ugly, but I'm pretty. And therefore, I, Cassius Clay, I'm the greatest. He's going to lose." Now, at this time, they all thought that he was basically insane. Because here was this skinny little kid from Louisville. And that's how he described himself. "I'm just a skinny little kid from Louisville. He's a big, ugly bear." And everybody knew that Liston had murdered people. He'd been in jail. He was this giant monster of a man who'd walked into the ring and demolished everybody up to the date, including Floyd Patterson twice in a row in the first round. And Patterson was renowned as a very cagey, clever, strong fighter. So basically every single person in America, which is where the fight was being held, was saying that it shouldn't be held because you can't put this skinny little kid, even though he has won the Olympic light heavyweight championship, in with this giant monster. So Cassius Clay kept on bothering Liston, and he'd invade his camp and he'd say, "You're ugly and I'm pretty." And he wrote all kinds of marvellous little ditties, which he wrote himself, and sometimes he composed them spontaneously. Things like, "It all started 20 years past. The greatest of all was born at last. The name of this champion, I might as well say, no other than the greatest, Cassius Clay." And he'd recite these to Liston while Liston was still the champion. So people were thinking the odds were something like, 11-0 and 55-1. And right up to the moment of the fight, everybody was saying this should not happen. Now, Clay entered the ring undefeated, and he'd already said that he accepted the fact that Liston was this giant. He accepted the fact that Liston could punch unbelievably powerful. But he, being the greatest, and being a skinny little kid from Louisville would float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I'm just going to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and he'll never hit me. Of course, everybody thought, yeah, sure.
Sounds like Ueshiba.
Indeed. I mean, very interesting. As this goes through, you will see some extraordinary correlations between the two. So the night of the fight comes, and I will always remember this. It's one of the most fascinating visions of my life. That Cassius Clay was in the ring first, Liston came in second, and they were in their corners, and they have to go into the centre for the referee's instructions. Now, I had asked everybody, and I've asked them to this day, how big was Liston at this time, and how little, so to speak, was Cassius Clay. And the average estimation is that Liston was about 6'4" and weighed about 240, 250 pounds. That Cassius Clay was about 5'11", 6 foot, and that he weighed about 180 to 190 pounds. I mean, a total mismatch. So Liston walks into the centre of the ring, and he always had these big hoods on his head that made him look really evil. And he would stare down at his opponent and give them this devil boom stare, fixate them like a fox gets a hare, and then just destroy them. So Liston walks out into the centre of the ring, looking down, and you can still imagine it in slow motion, right? Liston looks down, and then very, very slowly, his neck begins to fall back, his eyes begin to look up, and towering over him is this giant with a big grin on his face, playing around with his big rubber mouthpiece, looking down at him, grinning. And that was skinny little Cassius Clay. 6'4", 217 pounds of totally coordinated muscle and power. And everybody thought that he was a skinny little kid from Louisville who was going to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Liston's jaw dropped open when he saw this monster in front of him, because Liston was in fact only 6'2" and about the same weight. So Cassius Clay had totally hypnotized the entire planet and Sonny Liston into thinking
He was a midget.
that he was a midget,
Yeah.
and he was a giant. And he convinced them that he was going to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, so they all thought he couldn't punch. Not having looked at the statistics of his record, which showed that nearly every fight he'd won as an amateur was by pure knockout, and that he wasn't a floating like a butterfly, stinging like a bee at all. So the fight starts, and the commentators were saying things like, and the fight starts, and Liston's coming out, and he's looking really strong, and he throws a massive right which just misses, and Liston takes a left and right and right and left and left and right and right and left and left and right and right and left, but these are all light punches, and Liston's moving in, the fight should never have taken place, and Cassius Clay's about to be knocked out, and Liston throws a massive left which just misses, and Liston takes a right and left and left and right and right and left and left and right and right and left and left and right, and this goes on for 6 rounds. Right? Cassius Clay, this monster, right, who could land 7 punches in a second, the fastest physical intelligence the ring had ever known, landed over 600 punches totally unanswered. And even in the 6th round, when it was still going on, they were still saying, and here we are in the 6th round, and this fight should never have taken place, and this, skinny little kid from Louisville, and this giant murderous Sonny Liston. While Sonny Liston was being literally dismantled in front of them, no one could see it. And they couldn't see it because of the amazing power of the vision that Cassius Clay had planted in their minds. So he won the championship, in fact, absolutely and completely easily. And after the fight, continued to say, I'm the greatest. But he still kept on saying, and I'm floating like a butterfly, stinging like a bee, and I'm a skinny little kid from Louisville. And they still believed it. And to this day, you can meet people who've actually sat in the front row of that fight, and you say to them, how big was Liston? How big was Cassius Clay? And they still see this giant and this skinny little kid. And it wasn't so. So he had perfectly disguised this unbelievable power, this extraordinary energy. And as soon as he became champion, he started to do a lot of verbal presentations and so on and so forth. And he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. Now, people thought that that was a random, haphazard decision. But he explained it one day on television. He said, look, the reason why I changed my name was that when I investigated my own parents' heritage and my grandparents, I found out that Clay was a slave name that meant dirt. It literally was clay, dirt. And so my name meant slave, dirt. And I simply wanted to change that. And that's why I'm no longer Cassius Clay, I'm Muhammad Ali. And that was, if you like, the very rational reason, the sensitive reason for changing his name. He didn't want his children to have a slave name of dirt. And he began to do an enormous amount of charity work, which he never publicized. It was always fundamentally private. And he donated hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to educational trusts, to aiding the poor, to helping disadvantaged children, and so on. And he used to go into the most devastated areas of any citizen towns and just walk and openly say, anybody, come and talk to me. Anybody who wants to talk to me, come and talk to me. And they'd come up, children would come up, grandparents would come up, people off the street, and they'd just come and talk to him. And one of the big American magazines followed him around and then interviewed the people afterwards. And they found to their amazement that it didn't matter who the people were, what race, what color, what age, what educational level, there wasn't a single person who, having met him, didn't say, he's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And there was one derelict, a drunken, drug-addicted bum on the streets. And he spoke to Ali, and they interviewed him afterwards, and they said, what do you think of him? And he said, he is the greatest. No one's ever talked to me properly before. And he said, I told him my story, and I cried at him. And he looked at me and cried back at me. Extraordinary compassion and empathy. And as I emphasize again, not a single person who actually met him physically didn't say the man's absolutely extraordinary. And they all described this phenomenal aura, this enormous compassion, this interpersonal strength and aura that he had. The other thing about him, in terms of his genius, is his creativity. He took a sport that had been standardized and rationalized and scientifically and physiologically analyzed, and he basically broke every single rule. When they said you should have your hands up, he had them down. When they said you shouldn't dance, he danced. When they said the worst place to be is on the ropes, he went on the ropes. And he created totally new paradigms of physical activity and attack and defense. I mean, Ueshiba and he would have got along tremendously well. And those were just some of his skills. I mean, one of the other things that the people who trained him said was that he was utterly dedicated. He'd go into the gym, big smile on his face, and he'd come out 6 hours later, and they all said what he did was play. He simply came in there and played physical sport for 6 hours. And they said they'd never seen such speed, never such strength, never such dedication, and never such fun in an athlete.
So he was just enjoying himself?
He was absolutely, totally enjoying himself. It was all this wonderful playground for him. And again, very similar to
Einstein,
Ueshiba, Einstein,
Newton,
all of them playing. He also then began to develop his own managerial skills. Everybody assumed that he just, had his managers and like any other boxer let them do it. He didn't. Wherever he traveled in the world, he managed his own finances, he managed his own airplane schedules, he literally was his own manager. And with this extraordinary energy, he used to open his suite door wherever he was, and he would publicly announce, my suite is open 24 hours a day. Anybody who wants to see me at any time, simply walk in. No bodyguards, no nothing. Completely open to the world, if you like, for any conversation, any questions, any help that people might need. And he developed this verbal skill of his. When he was champion, he used regularly to be on chat shows. And one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of verbal intelligence was when he was on one of the English chat shows with Michael Parkinson. And, Ali walks in and he's all play and fun and so on. And Parkinson was sitting there with a board with about 10 linear questions on it. Mm-hmm. See, and he asked the first one, and Ali answered it and then told some other stories. And then Parkinson asked the second one, and Ali leaned over, right, grabbed the board quickly away from Parkinson and said, I'm taking it. He said, so now you don't have any questions to ask me, so I'm taking over the show. He said, Parkinson, you're a smart man, so you will sit there and listen, And you can be totally confident, can't you, that I am the only person on the planet who can take over a 1-hour show and give a monologue that will keep everybody totally entertained. And he did. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. And then eventually he began to draw in the audience, and everybody was laughing and playing and so on and so forth. The verbal intelligence of the man was unparalleled, and his ability to entertain and inform. And then in 1967, when he was at the peak of his powers physically, and he was becoming a star of all the chat shows, he was approached by the United States Army to fight in Vietnam. And
Approached by the United States Army.
Yes. And what he had to take an IQ test.
Yes.
See, and he failed it. And the army publicized this without realizing that they'd been totally conned. That he was so intelligent, verbally and mathematically, that he knew exactly the kind of answers he should give to get the kind of score that would have him just fail what he was supposed to be able to do. And they then decided to take his title away because he wouldn't fight. And, I mean, one of the things they said was, you know, you're a boxer, so you must fight. And he said, boxing is my profession. Going to get killed against people who I have no grudge against is not a logical consequence of me being a boxer. So they stripped him of his title, and alone for 3 years he fought the entire legal system of the United States, of the Congress, and of the Senate, and of the Army. He wouldn't take a lawyer. He simply said, I'll read the law, I understand the law, I'm telling the truth, I'm right, and I'm going to fight you to the end. And you can take my title, and I'll fight you back for it. And for 3 solid years, he took on squadrons of the best legal, the best verbal, the best analytical brains that the entire American system could muster, and slaughtered them. Absolutely extraordinary man. And because he became renowned among certain circles as so brilliant, he was invited by Harvard University to give the annual lecture. Now, this annual lecture is the ultimate intellectual accolade. All the top people in Harvard and around the local area come. It's kind of the stadium, the hall is filled with the greatest brains in the university. And to be asked to do that means you are also a great brain, and usually the great scientists and psychologists and so on have given those lectures. And it's Muhammad Ali. So the place is packed. And in he strides, and it's all on tape. He strides in, beautifully dressed, immaculate, kind of radiating health and energy, goes up to the podium. In a very quiet and gentle voice, he says, ladies and gentlemen, you know, this is one of the highlights of my life. As a child, my main dream was always to be educated. I always wished to be at Harvard University. You know, he said, but just due to my circumstances, it couldn't really happen. He said, and here I am, with you, my idols. He said, today I flew in my private jet and landed in the local airport and came in my limousine. And as my chauffeur was driving me up here, I saw you riding your bicycles to the hall here. And then I came in and I see you now, my idols. And I look and I see how bright-eyed you all are, and how beautifully dressed you all are, and how incredibly healthy you all are, and how amazingly happy and radiant you all look. And he went on, and they just rose as one and gave him a standing ovation, just at the beginning of his speech. And he regaled them with stories, he kind of threw them around intellectually, he had them roaring with laughter, and at the end, the standing ovation, they couldn't stop it. It just went on and on and on from all these top brains, lauding this unbelievably witty, brilliant man. And so he came back. And he came back to fight Joe Frazier. Now, Joe Frazier was a really tough man, and they had this phenomenal 15-round combat. And everybody said that Ali was such an egomaniac that when he lost, that would be it. You know, it would just shatter his personality. And the judges awarded the decision just to Joe Frazier. So it was the first time he'd ever lost. So down all the reporters go, forests of these microphones stuck in Ali's face. And they're saying, yeah, you know, you lost, so what do you got to say now? You said you were the greatest, da-da-da-da-da. And he looked through them all and he said, look at you all. Hundreds of you all focusing on me. You really think it's important, don't you, that Muhammad Ali lost a fight? He said, all I did was lose a fight. That's all I did. Why aren't you out there reporting something more interesting? Like what's happening in the war, like what's happening in the schools. Why aren't you focusing on something more interesting than the fact that I lost a fight? That's all I did. And I'll come back and I'll whop him because I'm still the greatest. Total confidence, took defeat, learned from it, came back. And he used to have these extraordinary titles that he'd give to fights. So the next one with Joe Frazier was The Thriller in Manila. And he was advertising it on British television. And Joe Frazier was there, and Ali suddenly kind of leapt out of his chair and he said, you're dumb, Joe, and I'm brilliant. And he wrestled him to the ground and so on and so forth, and everybody was trying to get them off. And then he looked into the camera and he said, by the way, my fans, let me tell you something. He said, that was all an act. He said, I love Joe Frazier. He and I are really close friends. We have the most phenomenal fights, and they are really fights. But I love him. But I'm going to tell you that I'm going to tell you that I don't like him. And I'm going to tell you that I think he's stupid, which I don't. And you'll believe me. Even though I'm telling you, it's not true. And he said, and you'll come and see us fight. And then off, of course, they went to fight. And he developed this phenomenal psychological, brilliant routine of explaining to the opponent beforehand what the fight was going to be like. So he'd be on an interview station, and they'd say, well, Muhammad, what's going to happen? And he'd say, well, I'm the greatest and he's a bum. And what's going to happen is that I'm going to be training up in the mountains. Now I've got a special chef. This chef has got special food that's going to build my strength. It's going to build my stamina. It's going to build my flexibility. He's going to be training down in the city. He's going to be running in the roads. He's going to get all those car fumes and pollution in his nose. I'm going to be running in the woods, and it's going to be beautiful and wonderful. I'm going to have sparring partners just like him, and I'm going to whop them in the training sessions because he's a bum and I'm the greatest. And on the night of the fight, I am going to be out there first, and I'm going to be wearing my big purple robe with Muhammad Ali, the greatest, on the back. There's going to be more noise for me than there is for him. I'm going to be up the ring. He's going to see me. Referee's going to come in. Bell's going to ring for the first round. In the first round, he's not going to hit me at all. In the second round, he's going to throw his hardest punch, not going to hurt me. In the third round, he's going to be sweating. In the fourth round, I'm going to be doing the Ali shuffle. In the fifth round, I'm going to knock him out. And they all say, ludicrous, ridiculous. However, Vision, in the newspapers would appear an article, Muhammad Ali is up in the mountains, training in the woods, has a special chef who is designing special food for strength, flexibility, stamina. 7 things he said are true. Now, who's going to read that?
The opposition.
The opposition. As the opposition goes out for a run on the streets, in the concrete, banging his knees, jarring his ankles, and getting all the pollution of the big cars. That's 11 things that he said have come true, but it's not the fight, so it doesn't really matter. Then out comes a news story which says Muhammad Ali has just broken the nose of one of his sparring partners. And then another comes out saying one of Muhammad Ali's sparring partners has left the training camp because the training schedule was so punishing, right? And then Ali gets on the radio again, kind of 17 things that come true. And he said, oh, by the way, when that first round comes out, I'm going to punch him in the nose. And then, as I said, he's not going to hit me at all. And he reminds what's going to happen in the fight. And so the night of the fight comes. Now, it's already about 25 things that he's predicted, all irrelevant, have come true. And so the opponent is sitting in his changing room. Now, if you've ever been in the changing room of a big stadium, the roar of a crowd multiplies in your little room. So Ali goes out, and this opponent who's sitting there hears, whoa! Because Ali would do anything to make them make noise, whether it was for him or against him. And then he goes into the ring. So the opponent comes out, sees Ali in the ring, which Ali predicted, hears less noise for him, which Ali predicted, sees the purple robe, which Ali predicted, sees Muhammad Ali the greatest, which Ali predicted, and it's all coming true. This is 30 things now, true, and the fight is about to start, so it isn't really important. What did Ali say would happen at the beginning of the first round?
He would not be hit.
And that he would punch the man in the nose. Now, of course, because it's so many months before, everybody's forgotten it. Ali didn't. He used to train in private, if he'd said that, to run at the first bell, punch the person in the nose, and then look at them, and then run. And he would just run. Now, if you've just been punched in the nose, right, and you've got this man running away in front of you, and the commentators are all saying, this is totally disgusting, he shouldn't be doing this is not championship behaviour, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. But it's coming true, and it's in the fight. You've been punched in the nose and you haven't hit him. So the second round comes out, and all that Ali said was, he'll hit me with his hardest punch, and it won't hurt. Now, what he would do is the opposite of what other people do. He used to train for the opponent's strength. So if the opponent could punch in the stomach, he would train to take the stomach punch. He wouldn't train to avoid it. So in the second round, the puncher, would come in, and Ali would put his hand on the fellow's shoulder and say, there you go, hardest punch. And the person would think, this is it. Woomph. And Ali would look at him and say, didn't hurt. And then he'd turn to the crowd in the middle of the fight and say, I told you, try it again. And he'd train to take it. And then he'd push him away and say, told you so. End of the second round. And it's now 35 things have come true totally, all according to Ali's vision, into which he's totally drawn the opponent. In the third round, right, all he said was, I'm going to be doing the Ali Shuffle. So it doesn't matter what else happens. He stands in front of the person, does the Ali Shuffle, and said, told you so. Fourth round, he said that the man was going to be sweating, which he's going to do anyway. Right? But what Ali would do is he'd pull the person into a clinch, and he'd say, I told you you'd be sweating. You're sweating. Remember what I said was going to happen at the beginning of the fifth round. Right? Now, you'd see these boxers' eyes would glaze. They'd go robotically back to their corner. They'd sit down in a stunned state because it's now nearly 40 things and it's in the fight and it's all happening. And he has said what? That in the next round, you'll be knocked out. And they would sometimes almost walk out pointing to their jaw.
Saying, like voodoo.
Yeah, saying, there you go, Muhammad. So he had this phenomenal control of the vision, not only of himself and not only of his opponent, but of the planet. And this is one of the most interesting points in his whole career, if you like, the definitive point. There was a big fight where he had to fight George Foreman, who was the big heavyweight champion, a bit like Liston, a giant, and Ali went through exactly the same routine as he'd done with Liston. And Zaire, which is where it was held, is a totally focused nation on this fight. And you've got this phenomenal champion, George Foreman, and you've got Ali, who's challenging to get the title back after having had it taken away. So he names it the Rumble in the Jungle, right?
So the Thriller in Manila and the Rumble in the Jungle.
And the Rumble in the Jungle. And these are all his originations. And it's interesting that they've become folklore. He had this extraordinary capacity to find the right little key to capture people's imagination. Foreman walks into the ring, and Ali is standing in his corner already, saying, Ali Bomaye, Ali Bomaye, and literally stirring the crowd. And the crowd starts to chant, Ali Bomaye.
And what does Ali Bomaye mean?
Ali Bomaye. So you've got 130,000 people screaming, Ali Bomaye. It means Ali, kill him.
Ali, kill him.
Right. So poor old Foreman comes in, and there's an entire stadium screaming that Ali should kill him.
Yeah.
But Foreman knows that Ali's a skinny little kid from Louisville, still, because he's still kept the myth up. The beginning of the first round, Ali just walks into the center ring, they do a little bit of shuffling around, and then Ali grabs him, picks him up, turns him totally 360 degrees around, bangs him on the nose, looks at him, and then starts to chant, Ali Bomaye, Ali Bomaye. And in the eighth round, he knocked him out. I mean, unbelievable psychology that the man had. But what is, if you like, profoundly interesting about that particular fight is that as he was going into it, right, so in the few minutes before this amazingly important event, one of the reporters caught him in the tunnel leading into the actual ring and very aggressively said to him, Muhammad Ali, right, you're supposed to be the greatest, but you're a Muslim, and Muslims aren't supposed to fight. How do you explain that you are a fighter? Ali grabbed the microphone, looked straight into the television lens, in other words, straight out through all the screens. And there were screens in giant theatres and stadiums. It was the biggest audience that had ever seen any fight. And Ali looked straight into the eye and soul of all the people watching, and he said, "My fans, I'm going to tell you why I'm fighting. You are now looking at the face that has been seen by more people than saw Mao Zedong, more people than saw Buddha, more people than saw Jesus Christ, more people than saw John F. Kennedy, more people than saw the Beatles. You are looking at a face seen by more people than any face has ever been seen before, so listen to me. The reason why I'm heavyweight champion is so that I can talk to you. And the message I have for you is the same as the message I give to my children and other children, and that is, don't fight. Learn to read. Don't fight. Educate yourselves. Learn to read. Got it? And now I'm going to go out there and whop his ass because I'm the greatest. And off he went. And everybody was transfixed. I mean, you could hear or feel all the hairs rising on all the necks around the globe because 2 billion people had actually seen him do that. So extraordinary multiple intelligences. And what is interesting is that in his later years when he developed Parkinson's disease, and so the person with, if you like, the greatest mouth on that level and the greatest physical skills slowly reduced and reduced and reduced. Everybody thought that he would just disintegrate and disappear. But he still continues to make himself publicly available. He will take 4 minutes to walk across a ring to see a young fighter. But he'll still, the fighters say that he just looks down at them, same twinkle in the eye and says, "Son, you're great. And just remember, who's the greatest?" And gives them a slow wink and disappears. And when they ask him how he now feels about his affliction, if you like, he simply says, my work is simply to help educate, to do charity, to bring as much compassion and love into the world as I can, and in whatever state I am, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm happy. And interestingly, when all athletes in all different fields are asked who was the greatest athletic genius of all time from all the fields, it's Muhammad Ali. By far. By far. And who was the most known face still in the history of the world? Muhammad Ali. Who could get the greatest audiences for pure verbal and humorous entertainment? Muhammad Ali. Who changed his field more than any other person in sport by creativity and innovation? Muhammad Ali. I mean, absolutely extraordinary man. Not what the public thinks. You have to be a Sherlock Holmes almost to uncover the genius that he used to project a certain image in order that he could communicate on the levels he really intended to do. The answer is yes.
Agreed.